Hi everyone. So we're always hearing about structured literacy and the science of reading and all of that, but where does that fit in at high school? What exactly is literacy at high school level? Let's have a look into this. So structured literacy at high school, well, at any school, structured literacy is about teaching explicitly and teaching systematically. So what do we mean by teaching explicitly? I've talked about this before and actually almost went mad because to me, teaching explicitly is not a thing, it's simply doing our job. It's teaching. So you are teaching with the aim of the students learning that thing, learning that knowledge point, that skill, and then checking they all know it, and they've got to write notes about it, then they've got to practice it, and then building on from there. So that's that explicit teaching. You are specifically teaching the skill. And the little tip that I always I like to use it myself, but also I like to pass it on. So I'll pass it on to you. So simply ask yourself, what is every student going to know before they walk out this door? Now that's quite different to setting, your learning intention on the board, your WALT, your we are learning too, because that's if we manage, this is what we're supposed to be learning, but let's see how we go kind of thing. There's always that sort of underlying feeling to me when I write a WALT on the board. So when you ask what is every student going to know before they walk out that door, that's a challenge to you, not the students. And for some reason, that slight difference makes all the difference. Excuse me. So, explicit teaching is instead of saying, okay, proofread your work, and then you move on, it's teaching them how to proofread their work aloud, slowly, with expression, and then getting them to, going around the room and getting them to read their work to you. Hey, well, read these first couple of sentences to me. Oh, hang on a minute. No, read it with expression, that kind of thing. So it's that insisting on it, it's following through, it's keeping going and sweating the small stuff. And you'll notice I say sweating the small stuff a lot in this vlog. Systematic teaching, because remember, structured literacy is about explicit teaching and systematic teaching. When we talk about teaching systematically, we're talking about starting with those core skills and then building on, building on, building on. So there is actually no point if students don't have core skills in you moving into more complex areas. So you've got to start with those core skills and then building on. And it's about that logical sequencing, isn't it? Okay, so yeah, logical sequencing applies to building on to skills, but it also applies to building on in terms of your thinking, so your thinking levels as well. So it's just that, baby steps, sort of like going through a recipe. Do this first, and then do this, and then do this. So maybe that's a good little analogy to keep in mind. So structured literacy is about teaching explicitly and systematically. Just going back to what we often default to when we hear that phrase structured literacy, and it's particularly when we hear that term science of reading, we often default to thinking, oh, it's all about phonics. And for us high school teachers, we didn't learn about that stuff. I mean, unless you've taught yourself. I've taught myself a little bit of this. However, that is not what those things are all about. That is a tiny little part of it. And at high school, of course, we're at that stage where we're adding on a whole lot more from there. So we hope that we've moved on from phonics. But it's good to know those basics so that when you have a student that's tripping up on something, you can go, hey, hasn't got the core skills here. I had a student the other day, year 10, and didn't remember what the vowels were. So you know, that's a core skill that I needed to go back and revisit. And you know, it's not a elephant, it's an elephant, that kind of thing. So it's good to know those core skills, but we need to have moved on. So the example I've got in my blog here, which I'll link below, is think about the year 12 student reading Shakespeare. They might have strong decoding skills, so they can work out how to say a word and now generally know what the meaning of a word is, but they're struggling with the bard because they have insufficient vocabulary, because there's a lot of complex vocabulary in there, and that doesn't just involve the archaic language. There is other stuff in there, right? Maybe syntax knowledge is a struggle for them because they haven't really grasped the idea that we can change things around, mix things up, and it still makes sense. It throws them, so that confidence isn't there. Maybe the background knowledge isn't there. For example, you know, you often hear students saying, "Who speaks like this, miss? Was this really a thing?" That kind of thing. Confidence with figurative language. Of course, there's a lot of figurative meanings in Shakespeare. Confidence with the line structure and the punctuation of verse. Inferencing skills. You know, the ability to calm down and get the gist. And that is a reading skill, isn't it? So that's what we're talking about when we talk about structured literacy at high school in terms of skills. However, to me, it's not just about the reading skills and the writing skills. It's also about two other things, and that is classroom habits and formative assessment. So in my blog, you'll see, and I'll put up on the screen here as well, somewhere over there, there's a graphic, and I show you that that explicit and systematic teaching is about classroom habits. It's about your reading and writing, but it's also about formative assessment. So let's have a little bit more of a chat about that. To me, the number one thing when it comes to literacy or teaching English, actually teaching anything, it's about classroom habits. And I've spoken recently about things like rote learning being the times tables of our subject. I've spoken before about insisting that things are accurate. You wouldn't find in a maths classroom students' books full of 2 + 2 = 5, 2 × 5 = 11, that kind of thing. You just wouldn't see it because they would be pulled up. It is inaccurate. Same thing applies to English. So to me, it's about the daily habits that are non-negotiable. So what have I got here? Again, it's that asking yourself, what will every student know before they walk out my door? So that is a daily habit for us. It's about getting back to books, and you know, I've preached that till the cows come home. It's keeping those books professional with their formatting, keeping them tidy, taking notes in those books. Yes, copying is a thing, and practicing in those books, completing the activities. We're not doing this because it's an optional thing. Quick, have you finished? Are you done? Are you done? Are you done? And it's about proofreading time every time. So, okay, now proofread your work, and then you pick on a couple of kids and say, read it to me. Read your work to me. Okay, so they know that you're checking. You're not going to check everyone's work every time, obviously, but they know that there's a possibility. They know that you think it matters. So you're checking, do they get it? Do they understand this teaching point, this thing that they're learning? And also it's about sweating the small stuff. All right, so those are kind of like daily habits, non-negotiables. You're working in those books, you're finishing the work, all of that stuff. So I've broken it down a bit more into routines are everything, you know, how those books are distributed, how they're collected back in, how they're cared for, that whole teach and model, and then students copying the notes, and then students practicing, and it might be small groups, and then pairs, and then individually, whatever you like. But it's about that routine, and then it's that understanding that they finish that work, and then you can all check, do they understand it? Okay, so that's the routine thing. Following logical sequences is the other thing. That's just a classroom habit. You know, I'm talking about your own classroom habit. Okay, where are we at with this? Am I following this decent sequence here with my teaching of this reading and my teaching of this writing, or am I just going all over the show? You know, is there a method here? Perhaps you've even given the students, you know, a bit of a list. This is where we're heading with this writing activity over the next 6 lessons, whatever. So it's logically sequenced. Again, formative assessment. So that's about marking their books, checking, you know, I've talked before about sticker ahead, and when the kids get to a sticker, they hand their book in. So you have 4 or 5 books handed in each lesson. For each class, admittedly, something like that, or run around and say, you know, as I said before, read your work to me. Okay, hang on a minute. Why are you suffocating? Because you haven't got a full stop, right? You know, like sweat the small stuff, sweat the small stuff. So that's formative assessment, and that to me is the most important formative assessment. Set quizzes. I've talked before about attainment goal tests, or whatever you want to call it. You give the test to the students first, they memorize the answers, and then you give it to them a week later, and you know, they get 80% plus because they've memorized this important work, like your figurative language, your sound devices, your parts of speech, all those things that actually need memorizing, the times tables of English. Digital docs, that's another classroom habit. My goodness, Google Classroom is the worst thing that ever happened to students because they don't have to do anything. They don't have to format stuff. Templates are all sitting there for them. They don't know their Google Drive even exists. Formatting a document is difficult for them. They can't name their documents, all of that stuff. So that's a classroom habit. Again, that is part of literacy. Proofreading skills I've talked about, obviously teaching them. If students can't read their work aloud, people, with fluency and expression, then they can't possibly proofread it because they don't know how it's supposed to sound. So that's practice, practice, practice. Well, I think we've dropped the ball with that whole we don't read aloud in class anymore because we don't want anyone to feel a bit stink if they are not confident with reading aloud. That's fine, but when do the students hear that reading aloud? When do they practice reading aloud? Because you need that. I know if I'm writing something that is really important, then I will read it aloud so I can hear what it sounds like. If students don't have that ability, then you're pushing it uphill. When you know, and you say, proofread your work, they literally don't know how to do it because we haven't taught it and because we haven't insisted on it. So proofreading, another important habit. The other thing, and again, I've talked about this before, don't expect the best. You know, people say, oh, I expect the best from my students. Don't expect the best. You know, I expect great things to happen to me on lotto nights. It doesn't happen. So don't expect the best. Insist on it. You're going to get the best only if you make it happen. So don't expect the best. Insist on it. You know, so it's okay. Write the date up. Yes, in full. Yes, you have to use capital letters. Do it again. Yes, capital W for Wednesday. Why do we have to write it in full? Because you can't spell Wednesday. Okay, so insisting on the best. No, I asked you to underline it with a ruler. Okay, now writing your notes, nice and neat. Highlight those keywords so that you can study from them later. That kind of thing. That is all important stuff. And I know it all sounds ridiculously boring, but if you're not doing that, you can't move on to judging and evaluating a text with some amazing critical thinking later on, because that core stuff, those core habits aren't there. Okay, I'll stop. There are some skills that obviously cover reading and writing, and again, you need to see the table that I'm putting into the blog. So you've got your sentences, your sentence structures, your key sentence structures, your repetitious structures, rhetorical structures, your purposes, that kind of thing, all to do with your sentences. You've got your skills where students are reading in order to write. So they're copying, they're note taking, they're paraphrasing, they're learning to summarize. So that's the read to write skills. Vocabulary, language techniques, and I know vocabulary is part of language, but it's quite helpful sometimes to separate that out. And structural techniques, plenty there. The main idea, the importance of knowing the difference between a theme and a main idea. A theme is a broad topic. Main idea is what the author wants us to know about that broad topic. So make sure students know the difference and that they can talk about that in their writing and their talking, their discussions. Have them know that a main idea, every text has a main idea, yada, 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 and it's illustrated through the details. Narrative voice is another thing that covers everything. Sorry, bit of an abrupt finish there. So that was skills that cover reading and writing. So in terms of reading, I really think it's a good idea to begin a year with the core skills. So that students have a structure to hang that learning from. So I think they need to know what reading on, between, beyond, and behind the lines actually is, and that they will be doing that, and that you start with reading on the lines and then you build on. Is that part of that reading process, that reading strategy? The elements of literature, they need to know those, or the aspects of literature, if you want to call them that. So, your plot, your key events, your turning points, your characters, the development, the relationships, the symbolism, again, main idea, all of this. Did I say setting? Setting, political setting, physical setting, social, cultural setting, all of those things. Give them the big map so they know where they're going. The other thing, of course, is types of texts. There's different types of articles, short stories, poems, that kind of thing. So they have that structure to hang their learning from. I think that's really important that they know that. Then, with your reading, once they understand that, then you can do it. So remember things like so you're going to be taking them through your on, between, beyond, and behind the lines. So obviously on the lines is just the literal meaning. Between the lines is your inferencing, but then you get into the meaty stuff, the beyond the lines. So thinking about what this illustrates about human nature, how it links to events from our past, our present, our possible future. What would different audiences think about this? All of that kind of stuff. Recognizing mood, using evidence to support interpretations, and then behind the lines, that's where you get into your context things and thinking about who is behind the lines. Why were they doing this? What was going on in their life at the time? What are they trying to do to the audience? What do they want them to feel? What do they want the audience to think? What do they even want the audience perhaps to do? So that's the meaty stuff that we're getting into with our literacy at high school. So from there, of course, we can go into responding. And that's drawing conclusions, or synthesizing as drawing conclusions from multiple texts, analyzing, making judgments, evaluating, that kind of thing. Remember, there's reading processes, that's just sequencing. So the prior knowledge, the pre-reading stuff, why we're reading, our prior knowledge, this kind of thing. You're predicting, and then you've got your during/after reading, which of course is where you do your on, between, beyond, behind the lines things. So that reading process is important. So that's our reading literacy at high school. Sorry, I'm kind of delivering this in a real monotone. It's the end of the day. I'm trying to go fast. So much to do. Let's get into writing now. So the writing, now here's where I'm really passionate about those core skills. And I've sort of keep thinking about my new mantra. I've got a few mantras. There's another one coming. Core before more. Okay, core skills before adding on. So the big one for me at the beginning of every year is, what is a complete sentence? Because then when these kids create these segments, fragments, which hasn't been done for effect, it's been done because they don't know otherwise, or those run-on sentences. I can say, hang on, let's go back to our notes and what a complete sentence is. It's got a subject and a verb, or a verb and a subject is what I prefer to teach, because it's easier to find the verb first and then think about who's doing the action. Little tip there, verb and a subject. Okay, the other thing that is core to me is we're not taking a breath, as I mentioned before. For commas, we're only taking a breath. For full stops or exclamation or question marks, of course. And the other thing, apostrophes. Pretty easy to teach that one. I've got a blog about it. I think there's even a little blog. All you do is you say to students, who owns the X? And the apostrophe goes after whatever you answer to that question. So the boy's bike, who owns the bike? The boy. You said boy, so your apostrophe goes after boy. The ladies lose, who owns the lose? The ladies, so your apostrophe goes after ladies. Please, for the love of all things literary, please don't teach students that if it's a plural, the apostrophe goes after the S. It doesn't always work. For example, the men's lose. Doesn't work. Who owns the lose? The men. So your apostrophe goes after men. I digress. Okay, what else? So after that, you can add on with your other punctuation marks. And the other core skill is proofreading, as I've mentioned twice now, I think, already in this vlog. So reading aloud, slowly, and with expression. So that's core skills, and we do it all the time, every day. So without those core skills, as I said, you're pushing it uphill. There's the writing process for formal and creative writing. These are the steps that we follow to produce these amazing pieces of writing. You'd be wanting to look at common errors, things like your homonyms, comparatives and superlatives, tense. Oh my goodness, keeping it controlled and consistent. And then there's all the common errors, like a lot is 2 words. You don't say a bit, a few in 1 word. Use 2 words. 2 words, thanks. Could have, should have, amount, number, much, many. Not that journalists can ever get that right on TV. I hear it every night. What else have we got? Academic language, connectives, hedging, analytical language, evaluative language, all the things. It's in the blog. And general formal writing structure is a bit of a thing as well. Well, there's lots of things. So what I've put together here is a set of tables that can help you, but you can add to those, tittle around with those as you like. But this is what we're talking about with structured literacy. So it's in high school, it's not just reading and writing skills. It's reading and writing processes plus those classroom habits. Without the classroom habits, the core before more, the proofreading, the bookwork, the insisting that it's done right, the checking, without those habits, it's all a waste of time. I hate to break it to you. Okay, so it's core skills, core habits, classroom habits, it's reading, it's writing, and it's formative assessment. Hopefully, I've actually helped and not confused you. Look at the blog. It's much easier to look at it in writing all set out. Okay, enjoy your teaching. Happy days. See ya.